Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and today I'm very excited to introduce our guest, John Lu, who covers my beloved Winnipeg Jets for TSN, also covered the Montreal Canadiens for over a decade. Thanks so much for coming on and taking the time, John. How's it going?
Good. Great, thanks. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Alex.
I first want to ask a little bit about your career. When did you first think you might want to pursue a career in sports journalism?
Well, as far as dreams are concerned, probably since I was a kid, I was always a big hockey, baseball fan. Collected cards when I was a kid. Had designs on working in the business, like play-by-play, that sort of thing. Like Howard Cosell
Hmm.
back in the day. But um, life sort of takes in different directions, and it wasn't until I was much later in my adult years, after going through university, graduating from university, and going into a different career, that I decided that I wanted a change in direction and chose to go back to school and study journalism. And at the time, I had focused on news because
Hmm.
there were a lot more opportunities in news, but sports has always been uh, a love of mine, a passion of mine from the time that I was a child. And so when I was in when I was in journalism school, I had applied for an internship with TSN, and while I was in my second year of college here in Winnipeg, and uh, I was awarded the internship.
Hmm.
Uh, but I had already been hired by CTV Winnipeg to do part-time news reporting while I was still going to school. So my new employers had were gracious enough to say, "Go have a great experience. Go to Toronto, learn all you can in a national newsroom." And so I went, did my internship, and at the end of it, I left a demo tape from some of my college stories and the work that I had done with CTV Winnipeg, and uh, one thing led to another. The right people watched the tape, liked my work, and what they had grown accustomed to from me working in the newsroom for several weeks as an intern. And so, yeah, they gave me an audition. And in the space of about, I guess, 24 hours at the end of my internship, which was in February of 2000, I got hired by TSN. So moved back, or went back to Winnipeg, just took care of a few things to with respect to with my college program, and finished up my semester. Then moved to Toronto in March of 2000, and been with TSN ever since.
And at the time when you were at TSN, I know you mentioned that you were in the newsroom. Was your goal, you said earlier, maybe play by play? Was that something that you wanted, or was it kind of what you became more of ringside and kind of analysis pre and post game and stuff like that?
Well, to be honest, when I finished up my internship, I had no intention of applying for a job. I only left the demo tape there as more to keep in touch. Like
Wow.
it's like, well, let's keep in touch over the, if something comes up over the years or as time goes by, um, then let's talk. But the thing is, because I'd already had a part-time gig in Winnipeg while I was finishing up my program, I thought, well, I'm just going back to Winnipeg to finish up what I was in the midst of doing, and continue my career, what I expected would be in the news side. And so no, I when I left TS, or when I was finishing up my internship, I still didn't feel like I was applying for a job, and it just so happened there was a vacancy, and just
There was, yeah.
sometimes life throws a major curveball at you, and that's what happened in that instance. That the opportunities was there. The gentleman who hired me saw, liked the potential that he saw in me, and the samples that I had provided in my demo tape, and so yeah, it was an opportunity of a lifetime, and so I jumped at it.
And I know you were in Toronto for I think 5, 6 years, and then you went to the Habs beat for where you were for around 15 years. What was it like covering like the Habs for so long, and how was your French when you got there?
Well, growing up in Winnipeg, I took French classes, not French
Mhm.
immersion. So I had what I would consider a working knowledge of French by the time I got into university, but didn't speak any French probably for about 15 years. by the time that I moved to my wife and I moved to Quebec. And so it became a learning process there, just partly through attrition, but also watching French television, listening to French radio, reading papers, and those sorts of things. So it's not as easy when you're an adult to learn, pick up a language as it is when you're a kid. So I, I, I feel like my language, my French language skills improved while I was out there. I don't consider myself bilingual, but still, it's the experience was a tremendous one. We were there for 15 years, and um, being able to live in I think, the most unique part of North America, because there is no place in Canada or United States that is like Quebec as far as its being, if you want to consider, you could describe it as a distinct society with the language and culture and population composed how it is. And so it was a really great experience, and getting to cover the most storied franchise in professional sports. Quite frankly, some people might argue that fact, but let's be real, it is the most storied franchise in sports. And it was a really incredible experience. Very grateful that I had the chance to do that for as long as I did.
Was there
But
any
yeah.
was there any moment that really stuck out for you from your experience in covering the Habs in Montreal for over 15 years?
Um, I can't identify a moment. I was there for 15 years, so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a long time, and that's a lot of experiences. It's more the totality of living there. That's just the day-to-day life, the change of seasons, literal seasons, but also hockey and football in and of itself. That's there's a pulse, and there's um, a uniqueness to life in Quebec. That to me that's something that's always going to be that's always going to resonate as an experience. Something that again I was very grateful to be able to live in for as long as I did. Now, having said that, if the Canadians won a Stanley Cup, well, then I would instantly say that yes, that was a, a memorable event or series of events
Mhm.
to be able to cover. But because my time in Montreal, the covering on my main beat, covering the Canadians was such a roller coaster. They would go from successful seasons to absolute
Mhm.
disasters.
Mhm.
It really kind of blends into one, um, I guess, continual
Mhm.
experience that just comprises the beat. But I mean, yeah, I mean, they did go to a cup final while I was there, but that being in the pandemic year, it was what I'll remember about that is that it was an incomplete experience, and that's we
Mhm.
weren't traveling because of the restrictions at the border. There was no practical way for me to be able to go to Vegas or Tampa to cover the visiting side. So we had reporters, other TSN reporters who would go and cover the visiting games, the road games for the Canadians, while I covered the home games at the Bell Center, mostly in mostly empty buildings because the
Mhm.
capacity was only 5,000 in a 21,000 seat venue, and not being able to go on the road, it really diminished the experience because it was you know watching the games on television at home and then reporting on it. It's not the full meal deal. So
Mhm.
even though the Canadians did go as far as they were able to against pretty much everybody's expectations or predictions,
Mhm.
it still wasn't a complete experience, which was unfortunate. But that was just the circumstances that we as a society, as a globe, as a planet, we're living through in that particular time in history.
Mhm. Mhm. I want to ask about your decision to come back to Winnipeg to work for TSN. I know you said it was a dream come true and you had tears of joy when you found out you were coming back home. What has it been like covering the Jets this year for you?
Well, first and foremost, it was a promotion for me to come back to be able to host the Jets broadcasts on TSN. So that was my primary motivation because I've been wanting take on those duties as the next step in my career for a number of years now. And so it was a perfect opportunity to grow my career. It just so happened that the bonus was that it was in my hometown, and I honestly didn't think that I would ever get the opportunity to move back to my hometown to work with TSN, simply because my predecessor, Sarah Oleski, I thought Sarah was going to retire here. You know, I mean, she's from here, and this is her backyard as well. But when she accepted the job with the Jets, that created a once in a lifetime opportunity for me as well. And so I jumped at it, and I still had to go through the process of applying for the position and being interviewed and waiting for the process to unfold for my superiors to assess the candidates that had applied, that they were interested, that they wanted to see who was out there. And that's absolutely fair. Of course, that's, you know, why wouldn't they do their due diligence? But ultimately, I was extremely grateful that they decided that I was the one to come here. And I feel like it's worked out great. I've absolutely loved doing the Jets broadcast. It's a lot of fun. It's exactly what I wanted to do, and getting to do what I had envisioned has turned out to be exactly what I was hoping for. We have a great crew, very dedicated, passionate, and knowledgeable viewership, and it's a smaller fan base than the two cities that I worked in previously. But having said that, the qualities that I just listed about Winnipeg hockey fans, no, absolutely, they stack up against any hockey fans in the world in terms of, you know, their knowledge and their understanding and appreciation of the sport. Just different characteristics of the fan base and the size, of course. But yeah, so I really enjoy how plugged in and how connected and devoted the fan base is here, and the fact that I'm amongst family and friends, lifetime friends from school and previous career and sports and other hobbies that were part of growing up here. Those people are all here. So yeah, the experience of being back home has turned out to be about as great as I thought it would be. So I've been very lucky.
That's awesome to hear. I want to ask, what do you love? Like, you've clearly told us how much you love your new job. What do you love about it, and what's your process like for being an in-game host compared to what you were doing before in Montreal and in Toronto?
Well, it allows me to expand my broadcast abilities, because as a reporter, you know, your segments are going to be a much smaller. That's your what you're asked to do isn't as extensive, but obviously anybody who watches Sports Center or any broadcasts say, well, I mean, hosts get to run the show. You know, it calls on a different or it calls on an expanded skill set over and above what reporters do. And you know, I felt that was the next step that I wanted to take. And so in terms of presentation and preparation and planning, you know, there's a whole lot more that goes into it, because as a reporter, you're working with a much smaller team, so to speak. There are fewer individuals involved in delivering what a reporter will do. But with the broadcast, it's an entire crew, you know, that we're delivering a show several times a week, or depending on whether we go on the road or I don't go on the road, not right now, maybe next season. But yeah, there's it's like putting on a performance every game, because there are so many people involved, and we follow a protocol because people want consistency. And I feel like our crew, they're so dedicated and professional and talented that I feel like we deliver a really good show. So it's a real blessing to be involved in that. And it's been a learning experience for me. Pretty much every game is a learning experience because it's very new for me. And so I've made plenty of mistakes along the way this season. But overall, I feel like I've managed to get better from day one. And that's all I can ask of myself.
As someone as someone who watches your pre and post game and during in game hosting, I've really enjoyed it. So I
Thank
think
you.
you've been great to the broadcast, and it's been awesome to have you on this year. I know you've talked before about Asian hate, just to move a little bit forward, in the past on your social media. And what has your experience as a sports journalist, hockey journalist, covering football as well, been like as a Canadian of Asian descent?
Well, for the most part, it's been a very positive, or that people don't even make an issue of it.
Mhm.
That's basically it. In my view, is like, well, in a broadcast or in a network, it behooves the management who hire, who choose individuals to represent their network. It behooves them to make sure that uh, that their cast, their crew, like people, whether they're in front of the camera or not, that the individuals that represent their company are representative of what our population is in this country, and that's pretty much every nation in the world is represented here. And so I'm really proud that I'm able to represent Asian people, China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, if you want to include the entire part of the globe in that regard. I take that very seriously, because I've had people of Asian descent come up to me many times over the years and say how important it is to them that somebody who looks like them represents them, that in essence speaks for them, at times advocates for them, because you know let's face it, there's a ton of racism out there, and since the pandemic started, it's gotten much worse. In Well, I can only speak so much for our backyard, like for Canada, United States. When you read about the number of incidents of Asian people being assaulted, or um, being abused because of political motivations that were calling negative attention, or laying blame with Asian people. And so it's to me, it just makes what I do, I think, that much more important, just because uh, uh, doesn't matter what nationality you are. Everybody that's represented has to have positive role models, or positive representatives, people that you know individuals of color, or sexual orientation, um, you name it, that they have to have individuals that they can look to and say that, okay, um, I can succeed too. That I can, um, that they're good, that they're success stories that they can use as inspiration, or help them feel better if they're going through rough times. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if that really answers what you're asking, because it's a really complex subject. And but having said that, me personally, the I've experienced isolated incidents of racism over the years, and so it's not surprising, just because there is that element in society that's out there, and you try to deal with it as, I guess, as gracefully as possible. But it's not easy. You talk to anybody, any BIPOC individual, whatever, and
Mhm.
it's a real challenge, and it's part of living in North America. That's you know it's always going to be there. So you just try to find the best way of dealing with it. But it's important to have people that are in your corner, whether they're allies, or your own people who are of your own descent and heritage, that support each other. And so that's why my representation for my community, I feel, becomes more important as the years go by.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you before we go to the Jets. what advice would you give to young journalists coming up in the sports media industry?
Well, it's changing. The industry is changing so much, and I'm talking about, the traditional form of media being newspapers. That's an industry that's really going through very difficult times, and is we've seen so many long-standing publications that were pillars of their community that they downsize or they go under, and so much more of sports media is based in the digital world. And so my advice would be to make yourself as versatile as possible. Be as strong in all forms of media as you can. First and foremost, writing, because fundamentally, all journalism starts with writing. I don't care if you're working print media or not. If you're not a good writer, if you're not a sound writer, then work on it. Because to me, that is the most fundamental skill and ability within the profession. Secondly, ideally, learn how to do it right. Go to school and learn journalistic ethics, proper style, how to interview, principles, because journalism is a funny industry simply because there's no watchdog, there's no ombudsman that holds media outlets to account. So there's a lot of irresponsible practice that goes on within the media industry, and media as a whole is under fire. And again, through political forces and agenda-driven people that are trying to tear it down, that are trying to undermine the fabric of a free press, which is fundamental to a democratic society. And so to me, it's like, well, if you're going to be a part of this industry, well, then learn how to do it properly. Like, learn how to be responsible and fair and balanced, and stick to those principles. And be prepared to have tough skin, because as the years go by, again, political forces that are trying to undermine the credibility and the strength of journalism are working against us. And so it's like, be prepared for a rough ride, because I'm talking about the media from a news gathering and news reporting perspective. We in the sports business don't feel it to the same degree, because I mean, we're not reporting on life or death. This is still entertainment and recreation, and it's fundamental to the core. But media is being lumped into the same category. It doesn't matter what you report on. The changing attitudes towards journalists does make it a more difficult industry to work in, simply because there's less trust, less respect and regard for people in the business and what they do, less patience for it. So that's what I would tell any young aspiring reporter, is that be prepared for these realities, because it's becoming more pronounced, more extreme as the years go by.
Yeah, very, very, very well said. Thank you for that. I want to now go to the Jets, the team that you cover day to day. As we've mentioned, they're obviously on a knife's edge right now of sneaking into the playoffs or barely missing out. They've been sliding for a couple months now, but they've had these two emphatic wins over Detroit and New Jersey, and their most important game of the year against Calgary. And probably, if the winner of that game makes the playoffs in that game on Wednesday, how important is it for the city of Winnipeg and just this team to make the playoffs this year? Is this maybe their last kick of the can with this kind of core group?
That's a pretty pervasive feeling in the market. And again, you go back to how plugged in and how knowledgeable the fan base is. You can't fool them here. People aren't people. Fans here are very astute. They follow the team very closely, very passionately and devotedly. And everybody knows that 2024 is going to be, whether we get there or not, and the current composition's intact. When you have the foundation of that team, starting with Connor Hellebuyck, and then your two longest standing Jets and Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele as UFAs in the summer of 2024, and then Pierre-Luc Dubois, depending on what he chooses to do with his RFA status as of July 1st this year, or what the club offers him or tries to extend to him. There are some fundamental pieces, depending on how this is handled. It could set the trajectory of this club for the next half a dozen years or more. And so this offseason, Kevin Shovel-Dayoff is going to have his hands full. There are some really big and tough decisions that's probably need to be done before they get to July 1st. That if we're talking draft week, which with all the GMs in one location tends to be a fertile ground for large transactions, impactful moves, then yeah, I think that's we are in for a very interesting summer, and one where I think the club absolutely has to decide what direction it's going to take and make decisions that ideally, if they can control the outcome based on those decisions, rather than make moves that are reactionary, then they'll be much better for them. Because the fact is, the Jets are not going to draft high this year. They don't have a ton of UFAs coming up this summer, but the fact is they need to set the table and the foundation for next year. And so what they do with the remainder of the season, whether they make it into the playoffs, and if they do, how far they go, how do they look in the process, like who performs, who steps up and shows that they are the types of individuals that they want to re-sign or continue with or commit to, however you want to describe it. That's all going to become clear in the next month. So, well, maybe sooner. If they don't make the playoffs, then it'll be sooner. But now, this Wednesday, it's going to be a fascinating game, because it's not going to completely determine the outcome of this season, because there'll still be, for both clubs, there'll be 4 games left after that. But for now, the Jets still control their fate. They are the team that's in the playoff position, and so it's up to Calgary and Nashville to try to catch them if they can. But for the moment, the Jets control their destiny, but they can really go a long ways towards.
I want to ask you, like, the Jets have had such a great start to the year, and they've been sliding of late, although they played better recently. What do you think was the biggest reason for their kind of poor stretch of play really the past month or two? Was it the defense, the forwards, the goaltending, maybe even the coaching?
Well, I just think that's every season has its ebb and flow, and it just so happened that's this year with the Jets, it happened to take a much more dramatic turn. That usually you see peaks and valleys that are fairly that aren't as severe, that aren't as dramatic. When you take a look at where and how the team was starting to slip, it coincided with players, like team leaders, that their plays started to fall off. And we've heard clues from Rick Bowness when he would, if we go back to January, he said that the club, when dealing with adversity, was reverting to habits from the previous season. And in recent weeks, he's been making more comments that are alluding to the same sorts of things, right? And so anybody who pays attention to the team has a pretty good idea of who he's talking about. This is where what we were talking about in our previous talking point, that the club has to make some decisions about where it wants to go. Well, it has to take all of these factors into account at the end of the season. It's like, okay, well, don't just pay attention to where they ended. It's like, how did they get there? And so I think that, again, what Rick Bowness was alluding to, I think that had played a large role in the team falling into inconsistent play. Blake Wheeler, something that he said last night, which hadn't really been addressed or acknowledged. He said that it seemed like that the club was fatigued. That their schedule had sort of caught up with them. And he said, oh, he said it, and then he said, well, that's not to use it as an excuse, because every club has got to go through its own tribulations in the schedule. But the fact of the matter is that if in fact that is a contributing factor, and fact is this week is not a strenuous one, next week will be. They finished their season with 3 games in 4 days. If they have enough rest time spaced out over this stretch run, then ideally they'll have enough gas in the tank to be able to make this final push and get into the playoffs playing the way that we saw them perform in the better part of the season, you know, like the first 50 games or so. But I think that's the old bad habits crept in. I think that contributed to an overall loss of confidence. And I think that confidence is such a funny thing, whether it's individual or collective, that once you lose it, it's hard to get it back. And so it takes the right type of success in small doses, like we saw on Friday, for instance, and that helps them get it back. But Sunday was it was more of a statement win for them. And so ideally, they'll have gotten past these issues that have been dragging them down over the last quarter of the season, and that they'll go into the playoffs on a high. But certainly, from an X's and O's standpoint, I think really what helped them was the reconfiguration of their front lines, putting Mark Scheifele at right wing on the first line. Vlad Nemesnikov seems to have a very good rapport with Nikolai Ehlers and Blake Wheeler. We certainly his last 2 games, and it's a small sample size, but small number of games left. And so, if this is a winning formula at this point in time, then stick with it, run with it, and see how far it takes them.
If the Jets do make it into the playoffs, how much confidence do you have in them making some noise in the playoffs?
Depends on the opponent, first round opponent, because obviously every opponent's just going to entail a different type of matchup. If they are going to the playoffs consistently at this level, like playing a more connected, unified system, like what Rick Bowness had been trying to implement since the beginning of the campaign, then I think that they could. I think they'd be a handful for any opponent, whether it's enough to beat Vegas, LA, Edmonton, or Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota. Who knows? I mean, they're all obviously very different teams, and again, present different challenges in those matchups. But I think that the Jets playing at their best, I think they can match up against any opponent. And the fact of the matter is that when they were playing playing to their potential, they were competing for second place in the Central Division for almost the entire season. They were very briefly in first place in the conference. Yeah, it was a cup of coffee, but even so, that was an endorsement for what was going right for them, what they were doing right, and with all the proper pieces in place. And that's the other thing too, is that they're going into the playoffs at this point about as healthy as they can be.
Yeah.
That they everybody is dinged up at this time of year. If you're not, then you're not trying hard enough, or you haven't been through the course of the season. So they go into the playoffs only missing Cole Perfetti, and Perfetti has no NHL playoff experiences anyhow. So how he would have been able to play in these circumstances, I guess we won't know, because it seems like he won't be back in time for first round or even through a first round, and he's still facing a long rehab simply because hasn't even been on the ice yet. So for all intents and purposes, this is about as healthy a Jets team as you could hope for going into this stage of the season. And so as long as they stay that way, and as long as they keep maintaining or improving upon the play we saw from them over the weekend, I think that they have a pretty good chance of, at the very least, matching up well and winning a first round, and then see where they go after that.
The Jets' best player probably this year has been Josh Morrissey, and he's been almost a point a game player essentially all year, and Norris Trophy candidate. What do you think he's done this year in his game to make him so effective this year?
Well, I think it's we go back to the offseason, and Rick Bowness talked about it early in the campaign when Josh Morrissey was really he had really elevated his level of play, and it's that Rick Bowness really helped press the right buttons. That he encouraged Josh to really um, believe that he could be a Norris Trophy candidate. And in addition to the fact that Bonus and the coaching staff want demand their defense to join the rush to activate on offense, and so that plays right into Josh Morrissey's skill set. He's a tremendous skater, really smart passer, very adept puck handler, good vision, good IQ, and so I think that's um, he always had the natural talent to be able to do it, but having a coach that challenged him to up his game and then provided him with the system and the framework for him to be able to succeed. That's been behind his success this year.
And another player that's been amazing as usual for the Jets has been Connor Hellebuyck. What do you think makes him such a special and fantastic goalie?
Um, well, the talent is obvious. I I I'm only covering. This is my first year covering him, so I really can't say
Mhm.
I haven't witnessed what is his process is like. But any great goalie is has tremendous preparation habits in terms of the physical, mental aspects of his game. Um, how he keeps a book on shooters around the league, like studying opposing players' tendencies, like what to expect. So yeah, some of the tactical part of it. I don't know that about Connor, but I just in observing, how he prepares, um, that he's a very locked in individual, very mentally tough. Um, from a physical standpoint, his preparation, he's very durable, and I think that speaks to probably like his fitness regimen,
Mhm.
nutrition, all the aspects that go into a healthy lifestyle, because it's such a demanding position, especially for a guy that plays as much as he does, and he's really a throwback that way, like the type who will play. He could if you'd let him, if a coaching staff let him, he'd play 70 games consistently every season. Um, uh, I covered Carey Price for his entire career, and he would have carried that workload for the entirety of his career as well, had injuries not derailed and now probably prematurely ended his career. But in Hellebuyck's case, the guy just doesn't miss time. He doesn't get injured, and he's able to deliver performances at a high level regardless of his workload. So I mean, he's really a special goalie that way because there aren't very many of them in the league anymore that can take on that kind of workload and still play at that high a level. And so, yeah, I mean, all the intangibles, pride, commitments, competitiveness, you see all of that in him. And when the Jets were going through this slide or this rough patch over the last quarter season, you could see that Hellebuyck's numbers started to inflate as well, and I could see that fans were on his case saying it's like, oh, he's not making stops when he should, and it's like, well, even if he wasn't, what are the defensive zone coverage look like? What were the high danger opportunities looking like? What were the numbers in terms of slot shots? It's like their defensive coverage really wasn't very good. Their structure wasn't there. So no goalie is going to look good under those circumstances. And the fact of the matter is that if Connor Hellebuyck hadn't played as well as he had through the first 50 games of the season, the Jets wouldn't even be in a playoff position right now. Because he would have been good for at least, you figure, half a dozen wins, if not more, from his performances. So, people that's ripping Connor Hellebuyck over the last month, 2 months, it's like, well, be careful what you wish for
Yeah.
because once he's gone, whenever that may be. Who's going to replace him? And then you know just snap your fingers and replace a Connor Hellebuyck or a Carey Price. And yeah, so if the Jets are going to progress through the playoffs, if they make the playoffs, and if they're going to progress through it, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it ends with Connor Hellebuyck, so he's going to have to be at his best. And early in the season, he was saying it, that this is the best he's ever played in his career. So if he can finish in that trend and continue it through the postseason, then yeah, the Jets will go as far as Connor Hellebuyck is able to take them.
I don't think any team is excited to see Connor Hellebuyck in a playoff series. So that's definitely for sure. Thanks so much, John, for coming on and taking the time to talk about your career, the Jets, and much more. I just wanted to, before I let you go, is there anything you want to plug for TSN, or anything kind of listeners should keep their eyes and ears open for with you at TSN and the Jets?
Just the final 2 games of the season are the games next week, Tuesday and Thursday, in Minnesota and Colorado. I hope they're going to be as impactful and as important as we believe they will be. But still, I mean, either one of those teams could be the Jets' first round opponent too. So they're very compelling games, and those will be the final 2 broadcasts of the of our TSN regionals. And yeah, so please tune in and enjoy. We love bringing them to you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I can definitely say that I love your broadcast for TSN, and it's great to have you come from Montreal to Winnipeg this year and have you on the broadcast. Thanks so much for taking the time.
My pleasure, Alex.